Hi there, in this video we're going to go over everything about percents. So this is the final video at the end of the percents unit. So let's start with the first question. 30 is 60% of what number? So you want to start with your percent equation. Part equals percent times your whole. This should be percent as a decimal times your whole. All right, so you have 30 is 60% of what number? So obviously 60%, that's your percent. Now you have to change it as a decimal, so move it 2 places to the left, so it will be 0.60. Now you need to decide what is your part and what is your whole. The easiest way to figure this out is if you look to see, okay, does 30 represent 60% or does 30 represent 100%? In this case, 30 is 60%, so 30 is only 60%. All right, so let's say there were a certain number of kids in the room, okay, and 60% of them were wearing blue shirts, okay? That means that 30 of those kids will be wearing blue shirts. 30 is 60%. Your job is to figure out how many kids were in the room, or your job is to figure out the total number. So you would do part equals percent as a decimal times your whole. So 60% as a decimal, 0.60. 30 is your part, so 30 equals 0.60x. I just put x in for whole. At this point, if you have 30 equals 0.60x, you need to get x by itself, so you would divide both sides by 0.60. So in order to get x by itself, these 60s, they cancel out, and you're left with x on the right is equal to 50. So 30 divided by 0.60 gets you 50. All right, so 30 is 60% of 50. If you ever think that you set up the equation wrong to begin with, why don't you go through and solve and then see if it makes sense? You know, if you read your question, 30 is 60% of what number? This of what number needs to be a number that is bigger than 30. Okay, if it's a number less than 30, then you did something wrong. All right, the next question says, what number is 10% of 150? So you always want to start with your percent equation. Part equals percent as a decimal times your whole. Okay, you know 10%, so as a decimal it would be 0.10, and you know of 150. So you know there's 150, you need to figure out what is 10% of that. So 150 is your whole times 0.10, which will get you 15. You just have to multiply that out. The next question is 35 is what percent of 180? So in this case, you're looking for the percent. It says what percent. All right, so you are actually given the part, which is 35, and your whole, which is 180. So 35 is equal to x times 180. At this point, once you get your initial equation, now you have to solve for x. So you need to get x alone somehow. So in order to get x by itself, you have to divide both sides by 180. And when you do that, the 180s, they cancel out, and you're left with x on the right is equal to 35 divided by 180, which gets you 0.19. At this point, you need to move the decimal 2 places over to the right to get 19%. Which number is the greatest? So you have 2/8, 0.04, 30%, and 1 out of 3. In case you don't know what 1 out of 3 is, right, it's technically 1/3. So the first thing you want to do is you want to change all the numbers to be all decimals. That's probably the easiest way to compare. You could also change them to percents, but in order to change them to percents, you have to change them to decimals first. So whatever, you might as well just leave them as decimals. All right, so 2/8 as a decimal is 0.25. In case you can't remember that, do 2 divided by 8 and you get 0.25. 0.04, 30% is 0.30, and then 1 out of 3, you technically, like I said, it's 1/3. So if you divide 1 divided by 3, you get 0.33 repeating. All right, so you're, oh, see, I actually organized them from least to greatest. So once you do that, you can see that the greatest is 1 out of 3. Okay, the next question is, the store owner paid $15 for a book she marked up the price of the book by 40% to determine its selling price. So part A says, what is the selling price? So you always start with your equation, part equals percent as a decimal times your whole. Now your selling price is not 40%. We're not working with 40%. It's 40% marked up. Okay, so you're technically working with 140%. So your percent as a decimal would be 1.40. Your whole is $15 because that's how much it initially was. Okay, so you're finding what is 140% of 15, which gets you 21. So your selling price will be $21. Here's the next slide. And for part B, a customer buys a different book that has an original price of $40. The book is discounted 25%. What will he be paying after the discount? So let's start with understanding the problem. After the 25% discount, he will be paying 75% of the cost. All right, so that's very important for you to understand. The question is asking after the discount. So after the discount, he's only paying 75% of the cost. So your equation is going to look like part, which is what we're looking for, part equals 75% of 40. Okay, so if your original price is 40, you're looking for 75% of that. You multiply 0.75 times 40, you end up getting 30 as your answer. So he will be paying $30 after the discount. All right. The next slide, part C, the customer must pay a 7% sales tax on the discounted price of the book. What is the total amount the customer pays for the discounted book? So let's understand this first. If the customer is paying an additional 7% tax, then the customer is paying 107% of the discounted price. All right, so in part B, we had a discounted price. We said that he's going to be paying $30. Now, he has to pay 7% tax on top of that $30. All right, so we're going to do part equals percent as a decimal times your whole. So an additional 7% tax would be 1.07 times 30. And then once you multiply that, you get 3210, which your customer will end up paying $32.10. All right, in the next slide, Mike bought a new jacket at a discount of 20%. If the original price was $65, how much did Mike pay for the jacket? So first we want to look at the item is discounted 20%, then Mike is only paying for 80%. So we start off with our percent equation, part equals percent as a decimal times your whole. And like I said, we're working with 80%, so it would be 0.80 times 65. So our answer we'd end up getting is 52. So Mike ends up paying $52 for the jacket. Okay, the next question says, John wants to reduce the size of his fencing around the backyard. He wants to reduce the fencing by 20%. The length of the fence is now currently 50 feet. What is the new length of each side of the fence? I'm sorry. So if the size of the fence is being reduced by 20%, he's only keeping 80% of the fence. Okay, that's your important concept. That's your comprehension that you need to understand of this question. All right, and then from there you can continue. So he's keeping 80% of the fence, so you would do 0.80 times 50, which will get you 40. So the new length of each side of the fence is 40. All right, the next problem says circle graph shows the preferences of music styles. How many more people prefer rock music to jazz music? So we're starting with rock minus jazz to find out what the percentage is. So 20%. There's a 20% difference between rock and jazz. So you need to end up finding 20% of your 800 people total. So 20% of 800, again, start with your equation. 20% of 800, you would do 0.20 times 800, and you end up getting 160 students. Your next question, Mr. Smith spent $46 on a new hat. This week, he learned that the same hat will be available on sale for $16 last week. Oops, what is the percentage increase this week? So if we remember our formula, percent of change is equal to the amount of increase over the original. So from $16 to $46, it increased $30 over your original. So 30 divided by 16 gets you 1.87. If you move the decimal 2